Messiah, welcome to another edition of the Cutting Room Floor. And I hope you enjoy this as much as I do, because I really appreciate being able to talk about all the stuff that I didn't have time to talk about on Sunday. And so that's always the preacher's problem, is what to cut and what needs to be just saved for later. And so this is an opportunity to say, hey, here's what I was also thinking as I was going through First Kings. I'm really digging what we're throwing down in First and Second Kings in this series, all the places you'll go. And one of the things that I just didn't get to is the part that comes right after Elijah defeats the prophets of Baal, right? And Pastor Jim talked about that last week, and I set it up again in this sermon. But right after that, Jezebel, who wasn't there, but she says, if that guy ain't dead in 24 hours, so help me. And so Elijah really did have to leave. And he left, I think it's something like 70 to 90 miles away. I mean, it was a long walk. And in the middle of this walk is the part where he just drops down and says, Lord, I'm done. Take me out. I've had enough. I'm finished. And then this is really cool. And I just didn't have the time to get into it. But I'm going to pick it up, chapter 19. I've had enough, Lord, he said, take my life. I am no better than my ancestors. This is verse 5 and so on. Then he lay down under a tree and fell asleep. At once, an angel touched him and said, get up and eat. He looked around, and there by his head was a cake of baked bread over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and he drank, and then he laid down again. Verse 7, the angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you. So he got up, ate, and drank, and he was strengthened by that food. He traveled 40 days and 40 nights. It's a big number in the Bible. That references Jesus. Remember when he, 40 days, 40 nights, tempted in the wilderness? And then he reached the mountain of God. Here's the kicker. According to this Bible anyway, this is a Concordia commentary put up by the Lutheran Church. This commentary put up by LCMS says that that angel of the Lord that baked him bread and gave him water, that was Jesus. Come on. Isn't that cool? That Jesus comes to Elijah in his time of need. Jesus comes to you in your time of need. He comes to us. He says he's the bread of life. Wow. I could have made a connection with the Lord's Supper. Could have also said something about when Jesus is transfigured on the Mount of Transfiguration. Who's there? Moses and Elijah. And they came to Jesus this time. It's all flipped around. Isn't that cool? All right, that's something that didn't make it into the sermon. Another thing is this wonderful story. It's an old story by George MacDonald, 1800s. And I think he was a pastor too, and I'm not going to read the story, but I'll quickly tell it to you. It's called The Princess and the Goblin. I've told this 10 years ago. And it's this story about this little girl, and she's afraid of these goblins, and her grandmother says, don't be afraid, I'm with you always, kind of a thing. So there's definitely a religious connection. And she says, I'm going to give you a thread. And whenever you're afraid, just hold on to the thread and feel your way through. And I'm going to put it right underneath your pillow, that kind of a thing. And she wakes up, she hears these goblins, and she reaches underneath her pillow, and she feels the thread. And so she touches the thread, and you can't even see it, you can just feel it. And the trick is, the thread only works if you go forward. If you go back, it doesn't work anymore. And so she takes this thread and she goes out the door, and you know where this thread leads her? It leads her into a cave. That's why I would use the story, because I was talking about caves and Elijah being in the cave. And this thread leads her right into the cave of the goblins, exactly the place where she doesn't want to go, exactly the scariest place in the world. And it makes no sense. Why, if you're trying to avoid that problem, would the thread lead you directly into the problem? but it doesn't work backwards. It can only go forwards. And so she keeps feeling this thread, and she gets into this dark cave. And then all of a sudden there's all these rocks piled up, and she can't go anywhere. It's like a wall. They're all piled up. But the thread goes through that wall, through the rocks. And she's like, she doesn't know what to do because she can't go back. She doesn't know how to get out. And she has to go forward through this insurmountable problem. And she spends the night taking these rocks down so she can get through the wall. And her hands are kind of bloody and sore and all that. And she gets through, and what's on the other side is her friend. I think her name's Curdy, which I like that name. And Curdy has been lost. And she finds her friend Curdy. And then they make it through the cave and so on. And then Tim Keller, who kind of uses this story and says that's exactly what Jesus gives us, which is this thread where we can't really see, but we know. And he says to his disciples, he says to you and me, it only works forward. And I will take you places, and it will look like places you don't want to go. And there will be problems that seem like you cannot get through. But keep following the thread. Don't go to the right. Don't go to left. Don't turn back. It never works that way. Instead, keep following the thread through the cave. I could have told that story and wanted to. Just didn't have time. That sermon was long enough. I think it actually was like 26, 27 minutes. So that's about my cutoff point, by the way. Then the last thing I wanted to get into, at the end of the sermon, I talked about being quiet and just being still. I talked about God comes in a still, small voice, that gentle whisper, and how you can only hear a gentle whisper if you're quiet yourself, and if you're not busy running around like a maniac like we usually do, and if you don't have the TV on, and I came across this story about this missionary in Africa, and I don't know what country in Africa, but it's in Africa, and I don't know, what group this was, but he said he would be in his house, working, writing, studying, even chores or whatever, and someone would knock on the door, and it would be one of the locals, and this person, and it happened all the time, they would come in, have a small greeting, and then that person would just sit on the floor. They would crouch down. And the missionary would continue doing his thing, reading, chores, whatever. And at the end of like 20 minutes or a half hour, the visitor would rise up and he would say something like, I've seen you. And they leave. And it's this idea of just being present. It's not about communicating anything. It's not about receiving information. It's not about expressing yourself. It's just this concept of presence. And I will tell you, I would add that to your devotional toolbox. And I use this one quite a bit, almost like once a week, if not once a day. Because sometimes, I use this Bible to study and preach out of, and when I read it, I'm always thinking about, I could use that for a sermon. I could use that for a talk. I could use that for this. Instead of using it for me. And so sometimes my best devotional time is when I just sit in my chair upstairs in my bedroom and I don't read anything and I don't even pray. I don't even talk to God about what I need from Him or anything like that. And it's 20 minutes. Half hour, and I don't know really what goes on, but I think it's just this concept of, God, I just want to be with you. Be with you. And I've never heard like some audible voice or something cool like that. I wish I would, but God, says He wants me to pick up a thread, not a rope, right? And that's what trust is. And so I just sit there, and I guess it's just my way of devoting, of worshiping, which is not talking. And that's a rare thing for me, is to not talk, and not have all the answers, and not even tell God all the things I need, and all my wants and worries and cares. And we should do that, and we definitely. Should we? Yes, definitely. But I think a part of devotional life is just nothing. As crazy as that sounds. Just nothing. Well, thanks for watching. I'm already thinking about the next one, going through the vineyard, and I'm pretty excited to preach that one next week because that one's about contentment, and I need that, and I bet you need it too. And the story picks up with King Ahab and Queen Jezebel and Elijah. And so please join in next week, and I look forward to seeing you then. If not, seeing you maybe walking around town. All right? And then for sure, July 5th. So more to come on that. But peace to you and God's blessings on your day.